For a young boy, the world is supposed to feel like a safe, steady place. It is supposed to be a place where you wake up in the same bed, walk the same streets to school, and know exactly where your parents are sitting when you get home. But for Keanu Reeves, safety was a feeling that always seemed to stay just out of reach. His life began not with a foundation of solid ground, but on shifting sands. He was born in a far-off city called Beirut, but his family didn't stay there long. Before he could even form clear memories of the Middle East, his life was uprooted. They moved to New York, then to Sydney, and finally settled in Toronto, Canada. To an outsider, this might sound like an adventure. To a child who just wanted a best friend who wouldn't move away, it was a series of goodbyes. The biggest crack in his world appeared when he was very young. His father, a man with a wild smile and big dreams, left the family. Keanu was only about 3 or 4 years old at the time. He doesn't talk about it much, but the silence that filled the house after his father walked out must have been deafening. One day, there was a dad. The next day, there was just a phone number that rarely rang and visits that were few and far between. His mother, Patricia, was left to hold everything together. She was a costume designer, a woman with a creative spirit and a huge heart. But raising a child alone in a big city was not easy. She worked hard, often moving from place to place to find work or follow a new husband. This meant that for Keanu, home was never a permanent address. It was a series of rental apartments, rooms in other people's houses, and temporary stays with grandparents. He learned at a very young age that the most important things he owned could fit into a suitcase. Because of all this moving, school became a battlefield. Keanu wasn't like the other kids who sat still and raised their hands. He was full of energy, a ball of constant motion. But underneath that energy was a deep confusion and a longing for stability that he couldn't put into words. To make matters harder, he struggled with dyslexia. Back then, people didn't understand learning differences the way they do now. When he looked at a page in a book, the letters didn't stay in straight lines. They danced around. They flipped backwards. What took other kids 5 minutes to read took him 20. The teachers didn't see a smart kid with a different way of seeing the world. They saw a boy who wouldn't focus. They saw a troublemaker. He remembers those days with a sting. He was expelled from one high school, then another. The principals would shake their heads and use words like rambunctious and disruptive. Sitting in a chair, listening to adults tell him that he wasn't good enough, that he didn't belong, chipped away at his confidence. He felt stupid. He felt like he was always the one who didn't get the joke, the one who was always left behind. It is a heartbreaking thing for a child to feel like they're broken, simply because their mind works differently. There were times when he didn't live with his mother. For a while, he stayed with his grandparents in New York. He loved them deeply, but it wasn't the same as having his mom nearby. He learned to be independent out of necessity. He learned to navigate the subway alone, to figure out where his next meal was coming from, and to rely on himself. While other kids were learning to ride bikes with their fathers, Keanu was learning how to survive in a chaotic adult world. Despite the constant moving and the trouble at school, he found an escape. He found a kind of peace in hockey. On the ice, with the cold wind biting his face and the sound of skates carving the surface, he didn't have to worry about reading or math. He didn't have to worry about his dad not calling. He was fast. He was a good goalie. They called him the Wall because he was tough to get past. For those hour-long games, he wasn't a kid with a broken family. He was just a warrior on the ice. But even the ice couldn't freeze out the reality waiting for him on the bench. His family life was a patchwork of stepfathers in different homes. His mother married and divorced several times. Each time a new man entered the picture, there was a flicker of hope that this time it would stick. This time, they would be a real family. And each time a marriage ended, the disappointment cut a little deeper. He learned a hard lesson early on. Don't get too attached to people, because they might leave. As he grew into his late teens, the restlessness that had defined his childhood started to push him toward a new goal. He realized that Toronto, the city that had tried to be his home, wasn't where he was meant to stay. He had a burning desire to act, but maybe even more than that, he had a desire to run. He wanted to go somewhere where nobody knew him as the dyslexic troublemaker or the boy with the absent dad. He decided to leave for Los Angeles. He was only 20 years old. He had an old Volvo car, a few dollars in his pocket, and a dream that seemed too big for a kid with his history. The morning he left, the sky was a bright, harsh blue. There were no clouds to hide the sun, just as there was no hiding the fact that he was stepping out into the unknown completely alone. He packed his few belongings into the car. He looked at the apartment he was leaving behind. It was just another space in a long line of spaces. He hugged his mother and his sisters goodbye. There were tears, of course, but there was also a strange sense of determination. He was leaving behind the heartbreak of his childhood. He was leaving behind the empty chair at the dinner table and the principals who doubted him. As he drove away, the city fading in the rearview mirror, he felt a heavy weight lift off his shoulders. He was scared, terrified, really, but he was also free. He didn't know what awaited him in Hollywood. He didn't know that he would become famous. He didn't know that more heartbreak was waiting for him in the future. In that moment, he was just a young man driving toward the sun, hoping that if he drove fast enough and far enough, he could finally build a life that didn't feel like it was constantly falling apart. He was off to find his own way, carrying the scars of his past, but refusing to let them stop him from moving forward. By the time the early 1990s rolled around, the world started to recognize the face of Keanu Reeves. He wasn't just a kid from Toronto anymore. He was the guy who said, "Whoa," in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He was becoming a star. But inside, he still felt like that lonely little boy moving from house to house. Hollywood is a strange place. It is full of bright lights and loud parties, but can be the loneliest place on earth if you don't have someone real to hold on to. That is when he met River Phoenix. River wasn't just another actor in Hollywood. He was different. He had this intense, burning energy that seemed to light up every room he walked into. He was talented, yes, but he was also kind and deeply thoughtful. When Keanu and River met, it was like two puzzle pieces finally clicking together. They understood each other instantly. They didn't have to explain themselves. Both of them had grown up in unconventional families. Both of them knew what it felt like to be the outsider looking in. They became brothers, not by blood, but by choice. They spent hours talking about music, about life, and about the confusion of growing up famous when you still felt like a kid inside. They played music together in a band, just for fun of it, sweating in small clubs where nobody knew their names. For Keanu, River was the anchor he had been looking for. River was the guy who would call just to say hello, the guy who would listen when Keanu felt overwhelmed. They promised each other they would navigate this crazy industry together. They even made plans to work on more films side by side. It felt like the friendship would last forever. But life is fragile, and it can change in a heartbeat. The date was October 30th, 1993. It was the night before Halloween. The weather in Los Angeles was warm and dry. The sky was clear, filled with stars that didn't seem to care about what was happening on the ground below. Keanu was nearby, performing with his own band, Dog Star. The air was buzzing with electricity. Music was blaring from every corner of the strip. It was a night for celebrating, for dressing up, for being young and alive. River decided to go to a popular club called the Viper Room. It was a crowded place, packed with people dancing and laughing. The thumping bass from the speakers vibrated through the floor. Outside, the sidewalks were teeming with people waiting to get in, while others walked by, enjoying the cool night air. There was no storm coming. The sky wasn't weeping. It was just a normal Saturday night in a city that never sleeps. Then, suddenly, the music stopped matching. River collapsed on the pavement just outside the club entrance. It wasn't a slow fall where someone catches you. It was a heavy, terrifying crumble. One moment, he was a vibrant young man with his whole life ahead of him, and the next, he was lying on the hard concrete. The chaos that followed was a blur of panic and shouting. People gathered around, their faces masks of shock. Someone called for an ambulance. The sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the noise of the city. Keanu wasn't right there when it happened. He was just a few blocks away, but the news traveled fast. In those days, before everyone had a phone in their pocket, news traveled through whispers and frantic phone calls. When Keanu found out, his stomach must have dropped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He rushed to the hospital, but deep down, part of him already knew. The hope that he clung to in the car ride that was fragile like glass. River was gone. He was only 23 years old. The heartbreak Keanu felt wasn't just sadness. It was a physical weight. It was the kind of pain that makes it hard to breathe. Losing a friend is hard, but losing a brother, the person who understood your soul, is a devastation that changes you forever. He stood in the hospital corridor, surrounded by sterile white walls and the smell of antiseptic, and realized that River wasn't coming back. There would be no more late-night talks, no more jam sessions, no more plans for the future. The days that followed were a fog. The media went into a frenzy. Cameras were everywhere, flashing like lightning, trying to catch a glimpse of the grieving friends. But Keanu retreated. He didn't want to talk to reporters. He didn't want to make a statement. He just wanted to be with his friends and mourn the loss of the brightest light he knew. He had to go back to work shortly after. He was filming a movie called Little Buddha. Imagine trying to act, try and pretend to be someone else, when your heart is completely shattered. The director and the crew were gentle with him, giving him space, but the pain was always there, sitting right next to him. Every quiet moment on set was a reminder of the silence River left behind. This tragedy taught Keanu a harsh lesson about the impermanence of life. He realized that all the money in the world, all the fame, and all the success could not stop death. It could not protect the people he loved. The safety he had been searching for since he was a child, it didn't exist. Bad things happen to good people. The best among us can be taken too soon. For a long time, the world looked a little less colorful to him. The joy of acting felt a little dimmer. He became more serious, more guarded. He had already lost his father, and now he had lost his chosen brother. The pattern of loss was repeating itself, and it was breaking his heart. He walked through the streets of Los Angeles, his head down, hiding behind sunglasses. People saw a movie star, but if they looked closely, they would have seen a young man carrying a heavy burden of grief. He was mourning not just River, but the loss of innocence. He was learning that in this life, you have to hold on to the people you love tightly, because you never know when the last time you see them will actually be the last time. The club eventually closed its doors for the night, and the crowds dispersed. The trash from the party was swept away the next morning. The sun came up, just like it always does. The world kept turning, indifferent to the tragedy. But for Keanu, something had shifted permanently. He was no longer just a happy-go-lucky actor, riding the wave of success. He was a man who had looked into the void, and the void had looked back. He was left with the memories of a friend who was gone too soon, and the realization that life is painfully, beautifully short. After the darkness of losing River, the world felt very gray for a long time. But life has a way of moving forward, whether we are ready for it or not. In the mid-1990s, at a party in Hollywood, Keanu met a woman named Jennifer. She wasn't an actress trying to get noticed. She was a quiet, artistic soul who worked as a personal assistant for a famous director. She had a gentle nature and a kind smile that made Keanu feel safe. They started talking, and they didn't stop. They connected over books, over music, and over their shared love for animals. For the first time in a long time, Keanu felt like he could breathe again. Jennifer understood him. She didn't care about the movie star persona. She cared about the man underneath the leather jacket. She became his sanctuary. When he was with her, the chaos of the world faded away. They fell in love deeply and completely. It wasn't a flashy Hollywood romance. It was real and grounded. As their relationship grew stronger, they began to dream of a future together. They talked about the one thing Keanu had always wanted but never had, a family. Then came the news that changed everything. Jennifer was pregnant. Keanu was going to be a father. You could see a change in him. The sadness that usually lived in his eyes began to lift, replaced by a bright, nervous excitement. He was 34 years old, and he was ready to be a dad. He wanted to give this child everything he didn't have growing up. He wanted stability. He wanted to be there for every single moment. He talked about fixing up a house, buying a crib, and reading bedtime stories. He even started carrying around a small ultrasound picture, showing it to his close friends with a proud grin. They were expecting a girl, and they decided to name her Ava. The months went by, and Keanu prepared. He was filming The Matrix at the time, a movie that would eventually make him a global superstar. but his mind was always on the baby. He would rush off set to go to doctor's appointments. He painted the nursery himself. He picked out soft toys and tiny clothes. He imagined teaching her how to ride a bike and how to stand up to bullies. He was building a castle in his mind, a safe place where his little girl would never know the pain of loss or loneliness. He truly believed that his past tragedies were just a price he had to pay to get to this moment of pure joy. But life is cruel sometimes. It doesn't play fair. In 1999, just a few weeks before Ava was due to arrive, Jennifer went into labor. It wasn't supposed to happen yet. They rushed to the hospital, hearts pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The corridors were bright and sterile. The machines beeped in rhythmic patterns. They waited for the sound of a baby crying. That sound never came. There were complications. The umbilical cord had become tangled, choking the baby before she could even take her first breath of air. The doctors tried everything they could, moving with urgent precision, but the damage was done. Ava was stillborn. The silence in that delivery room was the loudest thing Keanu had ever heard. It wasn't the peaceful silence of sleep. It was a heavy, suffocating silence of a dream dying. The nurse placed a small, still bundle in Jennifer's arms, and then in Keanu's. He looked down at his daughter's face. She looked perfect, peaceful, like she was just sleeping, but she was gone. The heartbreak he felt at that moment was different from losing his father or losing River. This was a pain that went down to his bones. It was the death of the future he had painted in his mind. All the plans, the hopes, the bedtime stories, they all vanished in an instant. He felt a hollowness, so deep it felt like a physical hole in his chest. He held his daughter for the last time, memorizing her face, saying goodbye to a person he had never really met but loved more than anyone in the world. A few days later, they held a funeral. It was a small, quiet ceremony. Standing there, looking at that tiny coffin, is something no parent should ever have to do. The sky was a stark, unforgiving blue. The sun shone brightly, indifferent to the grief below. There was no storm to match the storm inside his heart. The world looked normal, which made it feel even more surreal. People walked their dogs. Cars drove by. Life went on, but for Keanu and Jennifer, time had stopped. After the funeral, the house felt like a tomb. The nursery, painted with so much love just weeks before, was now a room that nobody wanted to enter. The tiny clothes were put away in boxes. The excitement of the Matrix release felt meaningless. How do you celebrate a career milestone when the most important thing in your life is gone? Grief is a powerful force, and it affects everyone differently. For Keanu and Jennifer, the pain of losing Ava was too heavy to carry together. It pushed them apart instead of pulling them together. They tried to support each other, but looking at one another only reminded them of what they had lost. The relationship, which was once built on love and hope, began to crumble under the weight of sorrow. They broke up not long after, two wounded souls drifting in different directions. Keanu was left alone again. He went back to work, throwing himself into action movies and physically demanding roles. He used the physical pain of stunts and training to distract himself from the emotional pain. He became even more private, guarding his heart like a fortress. He learned the hardest lesson of all, that happiness is not guaranteed, that you can build a beautiful future in your mind, but reality can tear it down in a second. He walked through the world with a new kind of sadness. It wasn't just the sadness of the past. It was the sadness of a future that would never exist. Whenever he saw a little girl with her father, a sharp pain would shoot through him. He wondered what Ava would have looked like now. He wondered what her laugh would have sounded like. This tragedy shaped him in a profound way. It stripped away any last bit of innocence he had left. It made him appreciate the fragility of life in a way most people never understand. He became softer, kinder to strangers, perhaps because he knew how much everyone was hiding inside. He stopped taking things for granted. But behind that kindness was a scar that would never fully heal. He was a man who had held his child in his arms only to say goodbye, a memory that would stay with him forever, etched into his soul like a tattoo on his heart. After the heartbreak of losing his daughter, Keanu tried to find a way to keep going. He buried his pain deep inside and threw himself back into his work. He was a professional, and he knew that the show must go on. But even though he was acting in front of cameras, His real life was falling apart behind the scenes. The relationship with Jennifer, the woman he loved and the mother of his child, couldn't survive the weight of such a terrible loss. Grief can draw people together, but sometimes it pushes them apart because the pain is just too heavy to share. They decided to go their separate ways, not because they stopped caring, but because being together reminded them too much of what they had lost. For a while, they drifted apart. Jennifer was struggling deeply. She was trying to navigate her own sorrow, fighting to find a sense of normalcy in a world that felt broken. Keanu, on the other hand, was thousands of miles away. He was in Sydney, Australia, filming the sequels to The Matrix. It was a massive production. He was training for hours every day, doing kung fu and wire work, trying to exhaust his body so his mind could rest. Being so far away from home gave him a strange kind of distance from his problems. He could pretend for a few hours a day that he was just a character in a movie rather than a man who had lost everything. But life has a way of finding you, no matter how far you run. It was 2001. The year was still young. Keanu was in the middle of a grueling day of shooting on the set. The sun was hot, the lights were bright, and the crew was bustling around. In the middle of this chaotic, noisy environment, a quiet message was delivered to him. He needed to make a phone call. When he picked up the receiver, the voice on the other end delivered the second blow that threatened to shatter him completely. Jennifer was gone. She had been driving her Jeep in Los Angeles early in the morning. It was a clear, dry night. There was no rain, no ice, no reason for tragedy. But somehow, she lost control of her vehicle. The car at the side of the road swerved violently and crashed into a row of parked cars. The impact was devastating. She was taken to the hospital, but it was too late. She passed away before the sun came up. When Keanu heard the news, the world around him must have stopped. The noise of the movie set, the shouting of the directors, the clanking of the equipment, it all faded into a dull hum. He was immediately struck by the terrifying distance between them. He was on an island continent, floating in the middle of the ocean, and she was gone. He couldn't get to her. He couldn't say goodbye. He couldn't hold her hand one last time. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. He had already lost his daughter. Now, he had lost a woman who tied him to that little girl. It was a double tragedy. It felt like the universe was conspiring to strip him of every happiness he had ever known. He didn't just lose a partner. He lost the memories of the family they were trying to build. With Jennifer gone, the only person left who really understood the pain of losing Ava was gone too. He had to make a choice. He could stay in Australia and hide, or he could go back and face the reality of his life. He chose to go back. He left the set immediately. The producers of the movie were understanding, halting production while he dealt with the shock. He flew for hours across the Pacific Ocean, staring out the window at the endless clouds, trapped in his own mind. He must have replayed their last conversations over and over, wondering if he could have done something, wondering if he could have saved her. When he arrived in Los Angeles, the media was already swarming. They wanted pictures of the grieving movie star. They wanted details of the funeral. But Keanu retreated into his private world. He didn't want to share his grief with the world. This was too raw, too real. It wasn't a movie script where the hero finds a clue and saves the day. This was final. The funeral was held a few days later. It was a quiet ceremony, but it was heavy with sorrow. Keanu stood among the mourners, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. There are famous photos from that day, and if you look at them, you can see the pain in his eyes. It is a hollow, empty look. He was surrounded by friends and family, but he looked completely alone. He had to carry the casket, or at least stand beside it as it was lowered into the ground. To stand there, under the bright California sun, and bury the mother of your child just 2 years after burying your child is a test of strength that no one should ever have to face. It is the kind of heartbreak that doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your spirit. During this time, people wondered how he kept going. How do you wake up the next day? How do you eat? How do you breathe? For Keanu, the answer was simple, even if it was painful. You just do. You put one foot in front of the other. You take it 1 hour at a time. You don't think about the future because the future is too scary. You just focus on surviving the present. The tragedy also brought back the haunting memories of River Phoenix, his best friend who had died years before. The pattern of loss was repeating itself. Every person he truly opened his heart to seemed to be taken away. It makes a person want to close themselves off, to build walls so high that nobody can get in. It makes you wonder if it is safer to be alone than to love and lose. After the funeral, he took some time away from the public eye. He disappeared for a while, but eventually he had to return to Australia to finish The Matrix. He had to step back into the costume, get on the wires, and fight imaginary enemies. But he wasn't the same actor who had started the movie. He was harder now. There was a toughness to him that hadn't been there before. When he fought on screen, it looked real. It looked like a man fighting against his own demons, fighting against the unfairness of life. He channeled his anger and his sadness into his work. He became even more dedicated to his craft because it was the only thing he could control. He couldn't bring Jennifer back. He couldn't bring Ava back. But he could do his job. He could be professional. He could be kind to the crew. This period of his life defined him in a profound way. It stripped away any arrogance or vanity that might have come with being a famous actor. When you have lost everything that truly matters, things like fame and money lose their value. You realize that all the money in the world can't buy you a minute with the people you love. You realize that the most valuable things in life are the connections you make with others, and the terrifying reality that those connections can be severed in a blink of an eye. So he walked through the smoke and the ruins of his personal life. He didn't complain to the press. He didn't write a tell-all book. He just kept living. He carried a memory of Jennifer and Ava in a quiet place in his heart. And even though the heartbreak was immense, it didn't turn him into a bitter, angry man. Instead, it seemed to make him more gentle, more aware of the suffering of others. He knew, better than anyone, that the person sitting next to him on the bus or walking down the street might be carrying a heavy burden of their own. This pain made him human in a way that stardom never could. It made him real, and it prepared him for the next challenge he would have to face, one that was waiting just around the corner. After the funeral services ended and the crowds of reporters went away to find the next big story, Keanu was left standing in the quiet spaces of his life. He had walked through the valley of the shadow of death more times than most people could bear. He had lost his best friend, his daughter, and the love of his life. By all logic, he should have been broken beyond repair. He could have become angry at the world. He could have hidden away in a mansion and never spoken to another person again. But that is not what he did. Instead, he turned his eyes toward the one person he had left who truly knew his soul, his sister, Kim. Kim and Keanu shared a bond that went deeper than just being brother and sister. They were the two kids who had moved from city to city, who had dealt with a chaotic family life, and who had held on to each other when everything else was falling apart. She was his anchor. But just as Keanu was trying to put the pieces of his life back together, Kim received a terrifying diagnosis. She had leukemia. It is a word that freezes your blood. Cancer. For over a decade, Keanu watched his sister fight for her life. This was not a movie where the problem gets solved in 2 hours. This was a long, exhausting war against a disease that wanted to take her away. During this time, the world saw Keanu Reeves, the action hero, flying through the air and stopping bullets. But in real life, he was spending his time in cold, sterile hospital rooms. He was sitting by her bedside, holding her hand while she underwent painful treatments. He was the one making sure she had the best doctors, the best care, and anything she needed to be comfortable. People often talk about how much money he made from The Matrix. There are stories that he gave away millions of dollars to the special effects team because he felt they deserved it. But the truth is, much of his focus was on saving his sister. He didn't brag about it. He didn't hold press conferences. He just did it. He used his resources to buy time for her. He stepped out of the spotlight to be a brother. This was the most important role of his life, and there was no script for it. While Kim was fighting her battle, the world started to notice a change in Keanu. He was no longer the energetic young actor bouncing off the walls. He had become quieter, more serious. There's a famous photo that went viral on the internet a few years ago. It shows him sitting on a park bench in New York City, eating a simple sandwich out of a plastic container. He looked small and alone. People on the internet made fun of him. They called him Sad Keanu. They turned his grief into a meme. But if you look closer at that picture, you don't see a man who is miserable because he is eating a sandwich. You see a man who is enjoying a moment of peace. He isn't surrounded by bodyguards. He isn't acting like a superstar. He is just a human being, sitting on a bench, taking a break from a world that has been very hard on him. He didn't care about the fancy restaurants or the VIP treatment. He just wanted to eat his lunch. The people who laughed at him didn't know that he was carrying the weight of his sister's illness and the memories of his lost family on his shoulders. They didn't know that his sadness was not weakness, but a badge of honor for loving deeply. This is where the true beauty of his character shines through. Most people who have suffered as much as he has become bitter, they close themselves off. They think, the world hurt me, so why should I be kind to the world? Keanu made the opposite choice. He decided that because life was so short and so painful, he was going to be as kind as possible to everyone he met. He became famous for being the nicest guy in Hollywood. There are countless stories from regular people who have bumped into him. He gives up his seat on the subway for tired strangers. He stops to help people whose cars have broken down on the side of the road. Once, he heard a paparazzi photographer was outside his house in the cold. So he went out and bought him a sandwich and a drink just so the guy wouldn't be hungry. He doesn't do these things for publicity. He does them because he knows what it feels like to be hungry, to be cold, and to be alone. He treats everyone with respect, from the director of a movie to the person who cleans the floor on set. He knows that every single person is fighting a hard battle that nobody else can see. When he talks to fans, he looks them in the eye. He listens. He doesn't act like he is better than them. In a world full of fake smiles and hidden agendas, he is painfully, wonderfully real. Today, Keanu is still here. He is older now. The lines on his face tell the story of the life he has lived. He is still making movies, still jumping off buildings and fighting bad guys on screen. But his heart is much softer than it used to be. He found love again later in life, showing us that it is never too late to open your heart, even after it has been broken. His sister Kim, after years of fighting, eventually went into remission. She won her battle, at least for now. That victory, probably more than any box office record, is the one that matters most to him. When we look at Keanu Reeves now, we shouldn't see just a celebrity. We should see a survivor. We should see a man who walked through the fire and didn't let it burn him up. Instead, he let the fire forge him into something stronger and kinder. He teaches us that you don't have to be happy all the time to be a good person. You can be sad, you can be grieving, and you can still choose to be gentle. He proved that you don't need a perfect life to be a beautiful human being. In fact, it is often the cracks in our hearts where the light gets in. He carries his heartbreak with him, not as a heavy burden that drags him down, but as a reminder to love fiercely while we can. He is a living example of resilience, showing the world that even after the darkest nights, the sun still rises, and it is still worth getting out of bed to see it. He is not just an action star. He is a hero of his own real life, and he did it simply by never giving up on being a good man.